the number one thing you need to do to be able to support your family when you're just starting out is get a real job. That's the mean thing to say because you need to have a form of income.
Well, Jason, I'm so glad that you were able to make some time. We were able to fit this into your schedule. I'm really excited to chat with you. And I know that you and I have had some conversations in the past. And you very kindly invited me down to your studio a few years ago. And you are, as part of this show, the Become a Game Composer show, the whole point of the show is to help composers support their family writing game music online. And so part of that show is reaching out to guests such as yourself and just to get your perspective on the business side. But what I think is really unique about you, since I've had the pleasure of meeting you in person and talking more about family life and schedule and those types of things, I'm hoping in our chat today, we can really dive into some of those aspects because those are really the questions I find my audience asking the most, because there's a lot of resources out there for composition and production and such. But I think what people really want to know is, if you're over the age of 30 and you have kids and you have, an established family life, how the heck do we do this as game composers? So let's just start the conversation with something a little bit more fun. What games are you currently playing?
Well, right now, so I play a lot of games and I use the word play loosely. I sit with my kids as they play games. That's been like the best sort of vicarious experience for me because it's the same as if I go to visit a developer. I'm just not a good gamer, and I'm always focusing on the audio or the music. And this way, it's sort of like handing the controls to the audio director and going, "You go ahead and play, so I can focus." Well, my kids are doing the same thing. So I've got a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old. So there's lots of Minecraft going on right now. Lots of Switch stuff. Like the Switch has been big. The Switch has been so big. We started with one, and now we have 3. Whoa. So we do lots of Switch things, especially on the TV. Yeah, and they love Animal Crossing. It's great. I don't know if it's because I have girls, but I love that we're not doing, shooters and even RPGs are okay, but this is a lot more just relaxing sort of world building and making friends and exploration sort of stuff. So like Zelda and Animal Crossing and Minecraft and a lot of times I'll even just play the piano, like we've got it in the same room as them until my studio's finished. So I'll just be playing piano and they'll be playing games and we talk and hang out.
That's awesome. Do you ever play, or do your girls ever play games that you've written for?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of the new Supermassive games like Until Dawn and Man of Medan. I've played through beginning to end like multiple times because they're so replayable with my youngest daughter, especially. Actually, my oldest was just wearing her "I Survived Until Dawn" t-shirt that that I got for her at like a Sony Expo so many years ago. She's wearing that today, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So we do stuff like that, and Moss. We play Moss, which is a lot of fun. I mean, that's where I'm more for the relaxing games. I always feel like at the end of the day, after 5 minutes of combat music, it's nice to not combat.
I totally understand that. Those intense games can get really frustrating for sure and affect other aspects of your life. So you mentioned that you're building a new studio. So what's the process? Where is it at in LA?
It's like 2/3 of the way finished. We started in June. And that's why I know you can't see because of the camera. This is the master bedroom, basically. That goes over to the bathroom sort of area. And then the bed's behind me. And then where normally we would have our dresser, there's like a 10-foot high by 20-foot wide stack of boxes and instruments.
Wow.
Everywhere. And the garage is overtaken with instruments as well. It was one of those things. We moved about 4 years ago. I wanted to do it then, but I was too busy and there was never a time to pause. I had a 6-week period where everything else wrapped up, including TV stuff, and nothing else was going to be starting. And I foolishly thought I could get things kind of built in that amount of time. But with the virus and with things opening back up after quarantine, everyone else thought the same thing. So it was like 6 weeks before I could find a contractor, then another 6 weeks before we could do any demo. And it's just taking longer
Wow.
than I anticipated, but it's going to be so great when it's finished. I had a studio in Raleigh. Is that the one that you came to?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So it's going to be a lot bigger than that, and a lot bigger, and a lot better sound. Just everything's like new and improved essentially. And we're doing it the correct way. So that means that it takes a lot of time, to get the right HVAC put in and the right flooring and everything else. Literally, there's a guy drilling holes in my stairs right now. My cable guy, Tom, who has helped me in the other studio as well. We're just trying to get like a panel on the stairwell so I can record that piano that was under the stairs at the old studio
Yeah.
is going to be on the stairs built into the wall in this studio, but I need to be able to patch mics into it. So a lot of cables going in the walls.
Well, I loved the previous studio, so I can't even imagine what an upgraded version would look like. So please share pictures. I want to see that.
Oh, believe me, you won't be able to miss it once it's finished. It's probably going to be, March of next year before everything's really finished and picture worthy, but it's going to be amazing for sure. I'm quite excited.
That's really cool. Well, something that I wanted to really dig into here today, since I would consider you a family man who you have your priority as your family first, and your career supports that. It's not the other way around. And I love that about you. And so let's dive into that a little bit. What's your structure for your business? Everyone does it differently, but if you were to kind of boil it down, when do you work? How do you work? How do you plan that kind of stuff?
I think there was definitely a very decisive, like, two structure way how I ended up working. And the first was structured around the fact that I was younger. And now it's structured around the fact that I am not younger. And I think if I remember, it was when it couldn't have, let me think, let me do some math. 2008, 12. Yeah, I think 35 was basically when I remember I was doing something that I had to go when I was working in a studio and not in my house. The last minute, whatever pitch or deadline got moved or something, and I had to work all night. And I came home and we were doing a meeting with like my then 5-year-old daughter's kindergarten teacher. And I walked out of the room, the bedroom, like to go to the meeting. And my wife looked at me and said, "What's the matter?" I'm like, "What? I'm fine." She said, "Maybe you should go lay down." I'm like, I'm fine." She said, "You're white as a sheet. You look like you're going to pass out.
Wow.
Go lay down." And that's honestly all I remembered. But apparently I went back and I laid down and then I slept for like 10 hours. And, in that awkward movie sleep, like where you're in this weird pose and you wake up with drool. And I realized that that was my body's way of saying,
Mm.
you can't do that anymore without like really paying the consequences. But even when I was younger, the all-nighter or the 7 days a week at the studio was more of a rare occurrence that I would do if I needed to, and then would always have time off to physically and mentally recover. And if I worked all day Saturday and Sunday, I would take off Monday and Tuesday.
Mm.
um, it's always been a full-time job for me. So I think, at least the way my brain works, if I don't have nights and weekends off, it basically just says, "No, I'm not writing any more music." And
Mm.
everything sounds horrible and I have no ideas. And I think the general way people maybe being creative, if you're an artist, you can sort of visually see in your head what you want to paint. If you're a composer or an instrumentalist, you can hear in your head to a certain extent what you want to do. I always have like that little voice in my head, and it's constantly working. And all I'm really doing at work is getting it into the computer. And if I get tired, there's no voice. I
Mm.
mean, literally, I had that happen for the first time in a long time when I was working on Swamp Thing a couple of years ago, because they had so much music that needed to be done, and I was working 7 days a week. And I did one episode like that, but halfway through the second episode was just like, no. And
Mm.
I had to take a couple of days off, even though there was a looming deadline and I might be fired. But when I came back after that rest, I watched the same scene, like, with dread in the pit of my stomach, thinking, "I'm still not gonna be able to figure out what I need to do for this scene," and immediately, I had, like, 3 different ideas. I just sort of picked one and went with it, and then the whole episode was finished, in the next couple of days. So, that's a long-winded way of saying it's always about rest for me, and
Mhm.
that balance between sitting at the keyboard, composing, or inputting what I've already sort of composed in my head, and then being able to do things that are the complete opposite,
Mm.
which is spending time with my family,
Yeah.
spending time outside. We've got a lot of animals and things. Um, w- Playing the piano downstairs, watching movies. It's usually very, very family oriented, and it just became more so after 35.
Mm.
I don't think I've ever done an all nighter since then, just because I would probably have to sleep for 3 days. It's just not worth it.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with you there that there have to be boundaries, and the older you get, the more taxing the most basic things become, and routine and
Yeah.
schedule are everything, especially with kids. So are you finding that your schedule is more based around the workload, or is it, I have 5 hours of energy today, or is it just I don't know.
A lot of times with games, especially, we've got milestones set up, and
Mm.
we know that there's X number of minutes every milestone. The milestones are probably going to shift and be a little bit later. So maybe your milestone isn't coming up in 6 weeks, it's going to be more like 8 weeks. But you have to do like that 30 minutes of music, let's say in 6 weeks. So then I extrapolate backwards from there and say, okay, that means I need to do 5 minutes a week for the next 6 weeks. And I can usually do about 3 times that if I'm
Mm.
focused, really, really focused on working. So then I know that I can do some other things as well. And then it's a matter of balancing the different projects. Because with games, there's always, at least the way I work, which is very open with the developer, and what else can I do to get you what you need to make the music really work
Yeah.
with the game. There's no a cap on the amount of stems, or there's hardly ever any revisions. It's always additions. They'll put it in the game, and I literally just got this email from a developer this morning. Like, fantastic. This queue is really great. So many stems. Thank you so much. We're putting it in the game. I don't know if we're going to have any other additions, but this one section we might want to add like a drum so that
Mm.
we have an option to bring that up more in combat or something. That's the kind of stuff that sort of pokes in different places, because you have to open up the project and remember what you did and then add something else. I had a trailer request come in yesterday, and they need it by Monday. So there's always the unknown last minute deadline. And whosever deadline is the closest, that's who I'm trying to mentally schedule the most. The ones that are a little further away, it's not a big deal if you work on that particular thing on Wednesday instead of
Yeah.
on Monday. Now, the only problem with this, being blessed and having lots of different kind of choices each day. Do I want to work on this? Do I want to do the trailer? Do I want to do the stem inserts? Which one of these
Yeah.
other two games should I do a queue for today? When I don't have a deadline, I just completely check out, and I'm not even in the studio. I don't even turn the computer on. I'm hanging out with my family. So as a
Mm.
result, things start getting really messy around here, and stuff gets piled up everywhere. I mean, I'm looking at like 20 different instruments over here in the corner, and some of them I haven't played like in 3 weeks. But it's just my brain's like, no, if there's not a deadline, I'm not going to be in the studio.
Mm.
So it's a bit of a back and forth. And some days I'll just say, okay, I'm not going to be writing music today, but I am going to turn on the computer. I have to back up files. I have to put things on the backup hard drive. I need to clean space.
Yeah.
I need to install that new VST that I downloaded 6 weeks ago and haven't even listened to yet.
Yeah.
Um, we got to do that a little bit, but it gets hard, because if there's not a deadline, it's like, well, why am I even here? Which is the wrong way to think about it.
I like that. What is something that you believe in your business that other people think is insane?
Hmm. What a great question. So, by other people, do you mean people outside of the world of game music, or do you mean other composers that work in games?
Let's say composers.
Composers.
People think I'm insane,
I don't
so
know. There's everyone has their own way of working. I would probably say the thing that raises the most eyebrows with friends of mine, not in a "you're insane" sort of way, just in a "I don't really understand that" sort of way, is if I start talking about, like, really geeking out about microphones or outboard equipment. Um, Now there are some, including someone that I was just talking to on the phone, like, 2 nights ago, that they're right there with me because they have a lot of microphones, they have outboard equipment, they play a lot of instruments. But it seems like there's sort of a split camp in composers where you have the composers that, do everything in the box, or they're just doing mock-ups in the box, and they'll record everything live, or they're doing everything in the box, including the mock-ups that are gonna be the final version. That's kind of one side, and then the other side is, playing as many things as they can get their hands on, even if it's just,
yep,
doing a shaker part.
yep.
And I think being a drummer, I've always done anything that's not a wind instrument. Like, I've loved playing guitar and bass, and I play piano, which obviously extends to keyboards. I've got every string instrument known to man, and I can do those if it doesn't need to sound pretty really, really well. I can mangle a string instrument really well. And of course, all the percussion.
Yeah.
So a lot of that is kind of the like, well, okay, well, we're just going to hire a drummer, or I'm just going to use like the most excellent sounds from Damage 2. And that all works. I always think it's best to play to your strengths. And my strengths just happen to be banging on things. So I
Yeah.
need lots of microphones because I bang on lots of things.
Yeah, but I would say that that's become a really big part of your sound. At least I've noticed listening to a lot of your music that there's always that through line of rhythm and percussion. Even if it has nothing to do with percussion, it could be string oriented or something, or orchestra. But you have that through line, and I love that you're playing to your strengths. I think that's important.
That's something that I really appreciate you acknowledging. And it was in my head, that was my greatest weakness for the longest time,
Hmm.
all through college, definitely. Because my friends in college that were music composition majors did cool things, like they played the saxophone, or they were a piano player and they had like a sampler. And so they would record themselves on their instruments, and I'm like, what am I going to record? Like a vibraphone? There wasn't a lot of uh like saxophone melodies, make it swing, do jazz, play cool piano stuff. It was just sort of like an auxiliary instrument, and not being as well versed as I felt I should have in harmony, especially being a drummer and a percussionist. I always looked at that as a real weakness,
Hmm.
and I've studied harmony and orchestration and everything to try to make up for it. But it really wasn't until the first Dead Space game, even after the score came out, that I realized the rhythm side that you were mentioning, the way that I've been playing drums and drum set, especially like all this progressive rock, like
Yeah.
just really fun, Yes and Rush and Genesis, like prog rock, crazy alternating time signatures. And I'm playing it on drums, and 11/8 plus 5/8 plus
Yeah.
3/4 is just like no problem to me. So I could write that way with Dead Space to make it this unbalanced, crazy kind of sound. It was just second nature. I didn't even think about it until the score came out and people
Mm.
were like, "What in the world is going on with the orchestra?"
Yeah.
Because not only is it crazy sounds, it's just insane rhythms. And I realized, like, wow, that's actually the biggest feather in my cap. What I've been thinking, I mean, at this time it was 8 or 10 years in games, 15, 20 years of professionally composing. What I thought was like the crutch that I was leaning on is actually what kind of makes me me. And I think it's important for people to realize that.
Mm.
And you can be as uncool as like the vibraphone guy with four mallets, which is what I was, and still play to your strengths.
Absolutely. So we have a lot of people listening, a lot of composers listening who don't have a lot of finances to invest in their studio and all the things. So we get a lot of money questions, and I want to hear from you, someone who's been doing this for a long, long time. I've been to your studio. I know that you have a lot of gear, but you even told me personally that um, get one thing at a time. Don't feel like you have to get everything. So let's focus on the one thing. If you are someone starting off, let's say you're 25, you're fresh out of college, ready to start your career, what is maybe a purchase of $100 or less that you think is just critical to starting this?
What have you already got? Because that's going to be a big determining factor.
Ooh. Well, let's say that you have the
Can we assume that
basics.
you have like a laptop?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right. Um, like you've got a laptop and you've got a DAW in there, even if it's GarageBand,
Yeah.
and you've got some headphones so you can listen to it. Uh, Microphone. You get an SM58 for $89, or an SM57 if you want to do loud instrument sort of things. But either one of them are less than $100. Um, Technically, you might need to get some sort of an interface, like if you're just monitoring directly out of the laptop. But it doesn't take a whole lot of gain. You don't need phantom power.
Yeah.
But the microphone, I probably already told you this story, but when I was in that last new studio for the first time, I had a single microphone that I had used to record radio spots and stuff back in the day when I was doing
Mhm.
local work, and I had a mic preamp. And they were both good, but I never used them to record instruments. And I was working on Tomb Raider, I think, and I was trying to get that's right. I was trying to get a gong, like a gong swipe. Because again, I'm a drummer and a percussionist, and I knew what I wanted it to do. It needed to be like a very certain shape, and all the gong, none of them were doing it for me. And I actually had a gong, just like a 40-inch gong, but I thought, and this seems like super obvious, but I thought, why don't I just record the gong swipe myself? And I did, and it ended up sounding better, just a dry recording with some reverb on it in the computer, better than any of the gong swipes that were sampled and weren't round robin. So I ended up tapping it then, and then I had like 3 tracks of just triangle beaters on a gong that sort of took the track in a completely different direction. And I thought, "Oh, that's a neat rhythm with the gong that I played, just literally making up as I was playing against whatever the track was. I could have the strings do this." And then it sort of snowballed, and everything inferred everything else. And that's just a gong, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it's like anyone could have played it. So if you play another instrument, talk about inspiration, being able to record yourself, use it in a track, especially now, what we can do with all the plugins, stock plugins that come with the DAWs,
Yeah.
manipulating it, turning it into pads, dropping it into a granular synthesis thing, putting reverb on it, dropping it 2 octaves. It's like, I mean, I've recorded my desk before, just tapping on the desk, and it
Yeah.
ends up sounding like this big drum. I would rather hear a poorly recorded live performance than
Mm.
a meticulously perfect sampled one, right? There's something to
Yeah.
that human element, if that's the kind of music that we're talking about, that that draws you in. Um, if it's electronic music and you're trying to be precise and you're using drum machines, then that's great. But you can use really cool stuff with your microphone then too. It opens up a whole world. Like literally, the world is your instrument if you have a microphone.
All right. You hear that, people? Get a microphone. um, so, as someone who pretty much has access to all the major VSTs, and I know you have a lot of outboard gear as well, what boundaries or limitations do you have in your workflow that allow you to not lose yourself in what is it called, analysis paralysis or whatever? Just having way too many options.
Yeah.
We all fall into that trap at some point. I know I do. I actually have to limit. I have to just shove stuff into a hard drive somewhere to where when I don't, and open up Contact, it's not 5,000 instruments. So what do you do to kind of help?
Usually, I thrive on limitations, whether it's something harmonic, like I want to maybe do something as simple as I want the score to mostly be in Dorian. So I know that I'm going to be doing a certain kind of flavor, harmonically speaking. But a lot of times, like 99% of the times, I start with the instruments,
Mm.
and it's not necessarily the ones that I want to include, but the ones that I don't want to include.
Hmm.
And it's like there's a Venn diagram, right, with three circles, where one circle is everything that Jason's been playing or working on for the last 6 months. And then another circle is all the fun things that Jason's wanted to do but hasn't had a chance to yet. And then the third circle is what the game actually needs.
Huh.
And when those three things converge, I can say, oh, well, right, this would be great. I could use, like Moss is a great example. So there's this little tiny mouse that's the main protagonist of the game. And I thought, well, I want to use all these small instruments. So what do I have around here that's small that I could use? Oh, I've got a Celtic harp and I've got a ukulele and I even have an accordion, which is like a little mini like concertina sort of thing. And then I have all these little tiny, like little tiny percussion things that I can do. And I just found everything that was small. And if it was too big, then I didn't use it. So then it was a matter of figuring out what the music would sound like with all of these small instruments. And that extended to like solo violin and flute and oboe and lots of little small kinds of movements in the kind of, if you looked at the MIDI transcription, like on a piano roll, it would look like little mouse footprints running around. Like anything
Huh.
that I could do, whether you realize it when you listen to the score or not, it's like interior motivation for me to both be restricted so I can focus,
Hmm.
but also be inspired by this combination of sounds that I've never worked with before. I think as creative people, the last thing we want to do is repeat ourselves. And one of the great things about games that I've experienced is no one ever hires me and says, "Can you just do the XYZ game that came out a couple years ago? We love that.
Yeah.
Just do it again for us." Right? They might say, "We love that. Now we want you to do our version of that for us." We don't want to hear the exact same thing. We want our world to be musically interpreted.
So I know that you have an agent, and I'm curious what role that plays in either specifically getting game gigs or perhaps other gigs. I'd love to know
Right.
how that happened in your career, when that happened, et cetera, and if it's something you recommend.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword. And there's kind of so there's two different things. And I could talk about this forever, so I'll try to be really concise. There's a big difference between an agent and a manager.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people think if I can get an agent, then I'll be able to get work. And to a certain extent, that is true. But the agent's only job, is not to go out and try to find you work. They're really more of a helping you with what's going on. Um, a manager is the sort of like, here's your I got your shirt pressed so you can go up and talk and look really good, or let me make sure that you've got that car rental for it. Literally, they're managing kind of your career, and
Hmm.
agents do that to a certain extent. And obviously there's lots of different agencies, and every agent is completely different. um, I was approached a long time ago by my first agent. It was literally just there weren't a lot of agents back then. So like Jesper Kidd or Inan Zur or Jack Wall, Tom Salta, all these guys, we were all sort of just the guys that did game music.
Yeah.
And this one agent represented all of us. Once Dead Space came out, I had someone from Gorfane Schwartz approach me. And I live in North Carolina, so I actually flew out to LA to meet with her, and I met with all the other agencies as well, because I didn't want to be just another, cog in the wheel.
Mm.
Um, Being in North Carolina, where most of my fellow composers are in Los Angeles or maybe London, I felt like it was important to have some sort of a touchstone,
Yeah.
and that's what they definitely do for me. There are jobs that will come in where literally someone will just cold call the agency. They'll call like all 5 or 6 agencies and just say, "We need music for a game,
Mm.
and we want it to sound like, pick a TV show or film." That's just this jumping off point.
Yeah.
Who do you recommend that could maybe do a demo or we could talk to? So that's when you have the chance to get some work, because people are actively soliciting your agent and your agent thinks, well, Jason would be a great fit for this. That's how I got Moss.
Mm.
They just called and said, who would you suggest? And she said, I know who would be perfect for it, Jason Graves. And the audio director laughed and said, actually, it's not that kind of a game. And she said, no,
Wow.
I understand. It's like this adorable game with a little cartoon mouse, and it's a virtual world, and it's like magical and kind of fairy tale storybook sort of thing. Just talk to him and let him do something, because she knew that while I love doing scary music, I really love doing whatever is different from what I've done before. And I
Yeah.
love melodies and I love harmony and I love the music that really moves you. It's just I've been moving people to run away a lot is
There you
what
go.
it
Yeah.
comes down to. I like the idea of being able to write some emotional music as well. So that's an example where having her as an agent, it didn't get me work, but it got my foot in the door for work.
Mm.
Um, most of what they do for me is they manage the contracts and they help with all the minutia of all the stuff that can be confusing to talk about with soundtrack royalties and
Right.
payments and milestones and deposits. And it's really, really nice to not have that awkward conversation with the audio director
Yeah.
when you're trying to maybe ask for more money. And I don't have to do it. Not only do I not have to do it, they will not let me do it. Like
Mm.
they'll slap my hands. You didn't talk about money, did you? No, of course not. That's your job. All I
Mm.
do is talk about creative stuff. And the audio directors are the same way. They don't want to talk about money either. So now you've got the money people talking to the money people, and I end up getting a better deal. The game developers are happy because they're well educated and informed.
Mm.
I think probably my agency spends more time educating newer companies just about the rights of game music, and a lot of them don't even understand how soundtrack releases work. It's not anyone's fault. It's just such a fast growing industry, and there's so many game companies out there now, and a lot of them are younger. So
Yeah.
I think the nutshell is agents are good. They're not necessary, but the catch 22 I mentioned is they're not going to represent you unless you have some work,
Yeah.
because they don't want to be the person that you're staring at or emailing every week saying, "Do you have anything for me? Do you have anything for me? How come I don't have any work?"
Yeah.
Um, you have to be a self-starter, and you have to be out there trying to get that work on your own.
So is that something that only those relationships usually happen as a result of agents reaching out to composers, I imagine?
I've introduced a couple of friends of mine to Gorfane, and they sort of brought them into the fold.
Mm.
It's like dating. Like there has to be some mutual, right, attraction going on there, where the agent sees someone that they can help, and the composer sees someone who can help them, and it's a reciprocal sort of a thing. Um, I know a lot of people send in demos and cold call agencies and things like that, and it's tough. Unfortunately, I can't really speak to it because I was fortunate enough to have that first agent a long time ago, and
Mm.
I've been with Gorfane for 13 years now. I don't even know what I would do without them,
Mm.
because it's just such a natural extension. Like I know everyone in the legal department, I know everyone in billing, I know everyone in contracts. It's like um, a family, literally a family, and it's a great place to be. But I'm also 20 years in the game industry,
Right.
and I didn't even have Gorfane until after 8, right? So it was 8 years of working, and that includes the first Dead Space game, which was sort of a peak in terms of kind of my name being associated with a certain title. And that's why she
Mm.
contacted me. She listened to the score and she thought it was cool and wanted to know if we could work together.
Where do you think the game industry is now today in 2020 versus when you started, and where do you feel like it's going to go from here? Specifically from the angle of business and how to get more gigs and how to, I don't know, to pave your way as a freelancer.
There's definitely a direct parallel line between kind of the movie industry
Mm.
from when they started, like boy, if I get my decades wrong, no one jump on me, but that sort of 20s and then into the 30s and then the 40s when it started getting really big, and you had these movie studios with on-staff composers and on-staff orchestras and physical scoring stages at the studio. And then they did TV that way a lot, all the way into the 50s and then into the 60s. That's how the laugh track became
Yeah.
so popular. This one guy started out with a box that had laughter, and he would wheel it around different places, and they started sort of copying it. That's kind of how games were back in like the 80s, I would say, and into the 90s especially, where a lot of the companies had complete on-staff teams for music and audio. Almost everything was done in-house. And then
Hmm.
once the internet came around, things started getting outsourced, but not in a bad way, just in a we can spread the wealth and get help from more people kind of way. Wall textures and kind of ancillary sort of things, but that also included music. And I think sound design is still more or less kept in house, but a lot of
Mm.
times, unless it's a really big publisher, like Sony, for example, are incredible to work with for music and audio in general. They have a huge team that just does that, and they can pick up a developer that maybe doesn't have the kind of resources they would want for a release that's going to go very, very big, and Sony can help them augment their audio team. But a lot of times the developer is having to augment it themselves. So they're looking, maybe when crunch period is coming, bringing on a couple of extra audio people to help with sound effects. You can't really bring on extra music people to help with music. It's sort of
Mm.
like we're in the big catch 22 where, saying I want to be a composer is sort of like saying I want to be a movie star, or I
Yeah.
want to be gold medal at the Olympics. It's attainable, and it's definitely credible to try to get to it, but it's even worse because at least if you want to be a movie star, you're not going to start out being Tom Cruise. Maybe you're going to be like an extra, and then you're an extra with a name in your character, and
Mhm.
then you have a couple of lines, and you kind of work your way up. And same thing with the Olympics, obviously. I just want to get to the Olympics, and then you race, and maybe you get a silver medal. With composing, it's like, no, you didn't get the job, and that's it.
Yeah.
There's no silver medal. There's no extra part that gets a dialogue, and then maybe you have a character with a name on it. It's all or nothing. And it's all or nothing normally for the duration of the entire project.
Mm.
It's like the indie movie renaissance kind of in the early to mid 90s, when Miramax started doing a bunch of stuff, and there really aren't like indie movies now. It's kind of
Mhm.
like everything is being, with Netflix and all that stuff, like everything's kind of indie in a way. I feel like that's very much the way games have happened in the last, especially 5 years, but the last
Yeah.
5 to 10 years. What used to be a very indie game, I mean, 10, 15 people and one composer that's also the audio director, that also does all the sound design and also does all the implementation. Um, that's not really the way the games get finished. They might start out that way. And that's actually how Moss started out. It was 12 people total. In the end, amazingly enough, it was still just two people in audio. It was the audio director and me. He did all the audio, he did all the sound effects, he did all the implementation, and I did the music. But a lot of times they're having to pull in from different places, and they're pulling them in remotely. And this is sort of my long-winded comparison. Uh, we're able to work from anywhere. And
Yeah.
especially this year, more and more people are working remotely. But with games, it's never been that much of an issue. No, I won't say never. I've worked with two companies here in town, and they were smaller. And it was great because they could come over to the studio and hang out while I'm recording music or an instrumental, guitar things being done. But other than that, they're always somewhere else. And I mean far away. They're in London, or they're in Paris, or they're in Seattle, or they're in Poland.
Mm.
And we'll Skype or Zoom, but it's all about FTP stuff. And the funny thing is, even with the local companies, we're still FTPing.
Yeah.
We're,
Yeah.
using Google Drive or whatever, and sharing assets. I think that's just going to become more and more of a thing. And it makes it harder to connect personally, especially this year with lack of conferences and things like that.
Mhm.
But if you can find ways to meet people locally and sort of start building that kind of network, let's just say in 2021, once all this is over, then it's about reaching out and making friends and face to face with people and kind of having meaningful relationships that don't necessarily mean like, hey, I'm a composer. Do you want to hear my reel?
Yeah.
Um,
Enough of that.
that's what people that's what people connect with. I spoke with an audio director that I hadn't talked to in, I don't know, maybe 18 months. And I think we talked for 30 minutes and none of it was about games. It was about like, I mean, we talked a little bit about music equipment and then we talked about our kids and it was about life. It
Yeah.
was about being people. So not having all these people crammed into one building the way the movie studios used to do in the old days and the game studios, aside from a couple, just don't do anymore. It's all about bringing resources in. And I think there's a lot more chances for us as independent resources in our bedroom to become kind of part of those families. It's just a matter of figuring out. And if you figure it out, let me know. I can't tell you like the
Yeah.
golden secret. How to connect with them, how to stay in touch with them, how to let them know that you actually exist.
Yeah. I know this
I'm
is
going to stop talking
definitely,
now.
no, that's a great rant. I loved that. That was a nice little walk through history, like about 5 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
What do you recommend, maybe as some final parting wisdom to composers who are early in their career and they just want to support their families? They have great intentions. They're doing the right things, right? They're meeting people. They're writing music. They're building their online social presence, which is kind of, I think, the prerequisite to just do what we do. What is maybe one thing that you'd recommend someone in those early phases to make themselves stand out and to maybe going into 2021, one thing that you think, well, that's the thing that's going to set them apart?
I'm going to cheat and say two things.
That's fine.
One is really mean to say, and the other one hopefully is a little more inspirational and will make up for the mean thing.
Okay.
Now, this is all based on personal experience.
Yeah.
If anyone out there listening hasn't thought about this, whenever you ask anyone their opinion, they're completely they're just a mirror reflecting their personal experiences. So my personal experience is the number one thing you need to do to be able to support your family when you're just starting out is get a real job. That's the mean thing to say because you need to have a form of income. My wife worked like part-time before my first kid was born. And then once she was born, she didn't work anymore. And I was trying to work as a composer, but I was also working at a coffee shop, which I wouldn't classify as a real job. But I was working at a coffee shop and I was doing this delivery service thing to offices in the morning. But what both of those jobs allowed me to do was I was finished with work at 2:00 every day. And I could work 4 days a week until 2, and I'd already done 40 hours. So from 2 p.m. on Monday through Friday, and then Monday through Thursday, and then all day Friday, I had free to do whatever I wanted, basically 2 days a week. But it meant that I was working really hard and getting up at like 4:30 in the morning to go to the coffee shop or to go to the food delivery thing. But I wanted to do it because I wanted to spend that extra time both learning music, but also doing all the networking and all that stuff that we talked about. But the important thing was I had these two small, but importantly consistent paychecks coming in. So even though it was just my wife and I, we could pay the rent on our condo. And I've always been the sole breadwinner. So I think it's really, really important to be realistic, especially in the beginning of your career, about having to make money somehow. And I would suggest you do a job that maybe you don't necessarily like. If you really, really love music and you really, really want to follow it, so that your brain can sort of check out at work. Or what I always did was my brain was a little checked out at work, but I was thinking about what I was going to be doing that afternoon. I mean, one day it was like analyzing Princess Leia's theme from Star Wars because I wanted to know what harmony he was using. Another day it was trying to figure out how I was going to get my sampled violins like 3 megabytes smaller so I could fit them into the sampler. I was always thinking about what I loved work wise and what I wanted to do eventually while I'm ringing up the person for their double skinny latte, because it was a brainless job and I enjoyed doing it and I liked the people and I was nice and I was good to the customers, but my heart wasn't in it. The worst thing you could do is get a job that by the time you get home you're completely drained
Yeah.
and all you can think about doing is like having dinner, maybe watching a TV show and going to bed. You need to be able to save like that hunger and that drive and energy and eagerness and enthusiasm for what you really do love. And that's the balance that's really hard. Every person has to figure it out. How much money do I need to try to make so I can live versus how much time am I going to be able to have not making the money but working on making better money down the road. And it's about investing in yourself, which brings me to the not mean point. This is another comment to the mirror reflecting your personal experiences. I'm consistently thirsty for knowledge.
Mm.
And I don't know if it's because I love music and I want to learn more about it. I don't know if it's because it's my personality and I'm just going to be going crazy about something and it just happens to be properly funneled into like a good thing.
Yeah.
But I have like a freaking library of music books and let's see. So what I'm reading right now, I know it's a little silly, but I've got the user manual to the compressors back here
Oh,
because
wow.
it's
Yeah.
very like crazy crazy detailed in the different things it can do. And I was making notes on that, but I read it multiple times basically so I can sort of retain it a little bit. These film score guides are amazing. It's just called a film score guide. They have like 30 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one's on Batman. And it's a lot of conceptual film music ideas in terms of themes and stuff like that. Sometimes you get a little bit of sheet music, but a lot of it's about sort of how themes are used and kind of the more clinical side of analyzing a film score, which is really cool. Then I also have signs, which I actually haven't even dug into yet. And then I've got scoring the screen, which is the secret
Oh,
language of
yeah.
film music, and I am almost exactly halfway through that. I've got a little mark there. And then I have the How to Train Your Dragon score, which is literally just nothing but literally the conductor score. All of these things, maybe aside from the compressor manual, were not available 20 years ago when
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
getting started. I had like music magazines and that was about it. There wasn't the internet. I know I'm old. But the amount of information that is available to us now, even just online, is really staggering. So the second bit of advice would be to fill your time properly. And if you're a family guy and you're working a real job and you're trying to find time
Mm.
to kind of work on your composing chops, this is a great way for that third piece of the pie, working on your composing chops. I don't listen to a lot of film music. I know it's ironic because this is about the secret language of film music, but for me, it's more about the harmony and the
Yeah.
use of motifs and like okay, you invert it, and then it's kind of the abstract conceptual idea of how you put things together, not dun, 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 like the actual music that Elfman wrote. I love the idea of just becoming a better sort of tinkerer with all of those sounds and orchestration and harmony and melodic lines and things are really the way that I study all of that. So if you're not if you can't afford I mean, I think this was like $80. It's not cheap. If you can't afford to get this yet, what you can afford is Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker or Holst's the Planets. That's going to be $12.
Yeah.
And if you can't read music and you want to be a game composer that is doing orchestra music, I would suggest learning how. I mean, I could probably bake a cake if I couldn't read a cookbook, but man, is it a lot easier if you can read the cookbook. You're like, oh, you put baking powder in there. No wonder the cake got so big. there's going to be stuff like that, light bulbs like that come on for me all the time. I mean, even now, I was just playing something on the piano last night from Phantom of the Opera, I think it was,
Mm.
because I just had the piano book. I'm like, oh my gosh, that melody's like it starts on the ninth the whole time. I never realized that, because if I play it at the octave, just unison, it sounds boring. But on the ninth, it's like literally mental note.
Yeah.
I'm going to do something like that where I start the melody and it's just going to like hit the ninth the whole time. And then I'm going to go to another chord. The ninth still isn't going to be in the progression. I'm going to let it resolve. I'm going to make it a sus chord or something. That's the kind of stuff. I'm getting a little too excited just talking about it. Maybe you didn't notice a change in my demeanor. Um,
I love it.
Not that I don't enjoy talking about the other stuff, but if you talk about learning,
Mm.
that just that gets me going. I think that's why I love playing so many different instruments and trying new things. But especially just this knowledge. I doubt anyone could ever like really learn everything there is to know about sort of the language of music and how it works. So hurry up and get started. That would be my second bit of advice.
Well, Jason, that is
Brief.
that's very inspiring. I love that. And it's honestly, it's very validating for me to hear that. I'm still not necessarily early in my career. I've been doing it for a while, but I know the first 5 years of being married, I had to spend doing other work and building up that income so that I could
Yep.
make that transition. And these are a lot of the conversations we have here on the show. Just practical advice of how to actually start a career without killing yourself and putting yourself in debt and all of those nightmares we want to avoid. So thank you so much for that. And I also love the second tip about reading and always learning and growing. And I think that's what it's all about, because you don't ever want to repeat yourself and you always want to be changing. So
There's a couple of different magazines out there. They really specialize more in sort of dance music kinds of things, like Computer Music Magazine, Future Music Magazine, Music Tech is another one. All three of them are phenomenal, but I know Computer Music, especially, they're not cheap because I think it's produced in the UK and it's 10 $6 or $10 a month for each magazine. But if you buy the magazine, even if you just buy 1 month, they have something like 70 plugins.
mm,
And some of them are really good. Some of them are just stripped down versions of totally legit, $100, $200 plugins. I mean, virtual instruments, compressors, EQs, effects, everything what you would need. And then on top of that, they'll talk about sidechaining the kick drum and the bass and how to get a more powerful low end and stuff that, you listen to the track and it's going boom, 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 it's very sort of dancey, and it's not what we would necessarily consider like traditional orchestral film music. But you can use all these techniques to do that modern hybrid sort of thing. And they'll go through, Cubase or Studio One or Pro Tools or Logic or Ableton and have all kinds of tips and tricks there. And I read them religiously. I mean, religiously every month, plus Sound on Sound. But that's more of a less techie and a little more general kind of music. But what's great is they're all current, and that you've got the newest news and the newest things that are coming out, and it's not the black hole of YouTube
mm.
where someone spends 20 minutes and you're just kind of waiting for them to actually talk about what they said they were going to talk about. I can't really watch YouTube either. These are professionals, right? You're paying good money and you're getting stuff back that is just priceless. I bought the back issues. They'll have a sale where you can buy like every one
Mm.
of their back issues for $50 or something like that. And I do PDFs on my iPad, so you can search, and it's just amazing. I would say computer music is the no-brainer for anyone who wants like this sort of inspiration for a penny on the dollar, and
Mm.
it'll fill your brain up. One issue will just be like too much information.
Well, yeah, thanks for that recommendation. I'll make sure that those links are in the show notes. That way everyone can check those out, and we'll
Cool.
make sure that we get everyone connected. But thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate you. I
Great.
know that it's always a pleasure. And I hope that you have a good one, and we'll stay in touch.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for the questions. It's always good to be able to talk about sort of the more hitting close to home
Yeah.
sort of things, for sure.
Yeah.
And we can do another one sometime and totally geek out about the best reverbs and software compressors and all that stuff. I'm always up for more chatting.
That would be really fun. Well, thanks, man. Look forward to chatting with you next time.
You too. Thanks a lot. Take it easy.